There are some plants that feel both ancient and totally modern at the same time, and the American white waterlily is definitely one of them. You might just see it as a beautiful flower floating on a pond, but its story is incredibly deep. We're talking ecology, medicine, human survival, it's all in there. So let's dive in. So when you see this plant, you're not just looking at some passive decoration in the landscape. Nymphaea odorata is an active, vital force. It literally engineers its own environment. It provides food and shelter for countless species, and it carries this history of sophisticated human use that goes back for centuries. Okay, before we go any further, we have to get something really important out of the way. This explainer is for educational purposes only. Handling or consuming any wild plant, and that includes the water lily, requires expert knowledge. You have to consult with a professional botanist or a medical expert. Safety first, always. So first up, let's talk about the plant's foundational role in its ecosystem. Long before humans ever really took notice, the water lily was already hard at work, literally shaping the world around it. Just look at the job this plant does. Its thick, creeping roots, we call them rhizomes, create this living net that holds fragile floodplain soils together. Then, on the surface, its big leaves act like these giant green umbrellas, shading the water. That simple act keeps the temperature down, which stops explosive algae growth and helps keep the water crystal clear. And of course, for fish and frogs, those lily pads are absolutely essential for cover, a safe haven from predators lurking above. And its role in the food web? It's basically a floating buffet. You've got muskrats and beavers that rely on those starchy rhizomes for a huge chunk of their diet. Deer and moose will wade right into the water just to eat the pads. And for bears coming out of hibernation, well, digging up those carbohydrate-rich roots is a critical first meal to get them going. All right, let's switch gears and look at its anatomy. Because in botany, precise identification is everything. And trust me, the water lily has some beautiful and very specific features you need to look for. So how in the world does a plant breathe when its roots are buried deep in thick oxygen-poor muck? The answer is this incredible adaptation called Aerenchyma. Seriously, think of it as a built-in snorkel system. These air channels run all the way from the floating leaves, which are making oxygen, down these long stems to the rhizomes, keeping the whole plant alive in what would otherwise be a suffocating environment. It's brilliant. Think of this chart as your field guide. The leaf isn't just round, it has a very specific V-shaped notch that cuts right to the center. And the veins? They radiate out from that center point like spokes on a wheel. But here's the most amazing feature, hands down. After pollination, the flower stalk literally spirals like a corkscrew, pulling the developing fruit safely down underwater to mature. How cool is that? Now, you'll often see its native cousin, the yellow pond lily, growing right nearby. And they're easy to confuse if you're not looking closely. But the differences are clear once you know what to look for. The yellow pond lily, Nupar, has a yellow, cup-shaped flower, and its leaves are more oblong or heart-shaped. And remember, it keeps its fruit above the water, unlike our spiraling Nymphaea. And this is where the story gets really deep. We have to talk about the plant's human history. For countless generations, indigenous peoples of North America developed this profound relationship with the water lily, seeing it as both a powerful source of medicine and a key to survival. And this knowledge wasn't just some general folklore, right? It was incredibly specific, and it varied from tribe to tribe. For example, the Ojibwa used the pulverized root for mouth sores. The Micmac used it for coughs and colds. The Ho-Chunk used it to break fevers. This was a precise, time-tested system of medicine. And some of these applications were just wow. This practice of a smoke medicine is absolutely fascinating. It suggests that indigenous healers understood that burning the root released powerful compounds that when you inhale them could have an almost immediate neurological effect, providing really rapid relief. But maybe the most brilliant piece of ethnobotany is how they figured out how to eat this thing. The raw rhizome is incredibly bitter because it's full of tannins. So how do you turn it into a food source? Well, through chemistry. They developed this amazing multi-step process, soaking the roots in an alkaline solution made from wood ash. This natural lye neutralized the tannins. Then, after boiling it in fresh water a few times to wash off the lye, they were left with a safe, starchy food that could be cooked just like a potato or even ground into flour. So, what happens when European settlers arrived? Well, they often lacked their familiar medicines, not to mention trained doctors. So naturally, they turned to the most reliable source of medical knowledge they could find, the indigenous peoples. This image really captures that moment, that transfer of knowledge. The survival of many of those early colonists really depended on adapting the botanical wisdom that had been cultivated on this land for millennia. And the water lily was one of the key plants that made its way from the indigenous world into the settlers' medicine chests. By the 19th century, this wasn't just folk medicine anymore. Physicians, known as the eclectics, who were all about botanical remedies, formally brought the water lily into their practice. They categorized it based on its effects, as an astringent for things like diarrhea, a demulcent to soothe coughs, and an anodyne, which is just a fancy word for a pain reliever, for skin problems. They were essentially documenting and systematizing the very principles they learned from indigenous traditions. And it wasn't all just about medicine. The water lily had a huge cultural and economic impact too. I mean, its beauty was just undeniable. Professional gatherers would harvest the flowers, and they were sold in bustling city markets where people treasured them as water nymphs for their delicate, ethereal beauty. Okay, so let's fast forward to today. How do we view this plant now? Well, through the lens of modern science, its legacy is more complex and more fascinating than ever before. What's so cool is that modern analysis basically confirms what traditional healers knew all along. The high concentration of tannins, that totally explains why it was so effective for digestive issues. The presence of other compounds like flavonols and alkaloids helps explain its broader medicinal uses. And yeah, the existence of volatile compounds provides a scientific basis for something as incredible as smoke medicine. But all this talk of use brings us back to the most critical rule of working with wild plants: absolute certainty. Because while the water lily is safe when you prepare it correctly, a deadly mistake is frighteningly easy to make. And I cannot stress this enough, Veratrum viridi, or false hellebore, is a lethally toxic plant. Now, it doesn't float, its leaves are upright and kind of pleated, but it often grows in the exact same muddy banks where you'd be looking for water lily rhizomes. Mistaking one for the other can be fatal. This is why you never, ever, ever harvest a plant that you can't identify with 100% confidence. And this brings us to the final fascinating paradox of the water lily. In its native range in the eastern U.S., it's celebrated as a keystone species, a vital part of the ecosystem. But in parts of the western U.S. where it's been introduced, its incredible efficiency lets it grow into these massive, dense mats that choke out other species and clog entire waterways, earning it the official title of a noxious weed. So it's all three things at once: a sacred medicine, a brilliant ecological engineer, and sometimes a problematic weed. The story of the American water lily is really a reminder that nature is never simple. It challenges us to look deeper, to understand context, and to think really carefully about our own role in managing such a powerful and multifaceted living legacy.